everyone, and welcome to the Nickel City Mafia channel. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I have a special guest with me today, Tony Altieri. We're going to be talking U.S. Open golf. Super excited. What is this, our second major of the year, Tony?
Yeah, we're kicking it off full gear here. The second major, obviously, or technically the third because of what happened with the Masters, but we just finished the PGA, which was the official kickoff to major season in the golf season.
Yeah, awesome. So excited about this one. So let's get right into it. Tony Altieri, I've known you for a little bit over 10 years, and you and I, about 6-7 years ago, we kind of started dabbling into DraftKings, and we love DraftKings. I mean, it's a lot of fun. I know you've kind of pivoted, and you can kind of give your reasons why. I still play it every now and then. I actually, especially for the majors. Majors is where I definitely invest into DFS for DraftKings. The problem was you and I were dabbling with different models, and while the models help, in some cases it kind of helped narrow the pool. It just wasn't getting us those 6-6 lineups through, and it was kind of frustrating. But then at some point, I stopped doing the models. You became the king of the model, and in the last year, you've been kind of killing it. So I'm going to bring up some numbers on you, and you kind of talk about that, if you would, please.
Yeah, it's really difficult, especially as the game has grown in popularity, especially with daily fantasy golf. DraftKings, FanDuel, these sites that allow millions of people to compete and use data that's readily available. It's really made that market super competitive. And I think the biggest thing is we quickly discovered how difficult it is to get 6 of 6 guys through a cut. When you're trying to build to that threshold, whatever that cap is at the top, even using gobs and gobs of data, it's really difficult to do. And so what I started doing last year back at the U.S. Open in 2020 or 2021, however it's categorized, when Bryson DeChambeau won, I started using the data to help me in my golf betting. And what that's done is it's allowed me to hit, I think, something like 13 winners out of 35 tournaments. I've hit a number of top 5s and top 10s. Top 20s. And I mean, all of this started with an initial investment of about $100. So I think the big thing is the data is extremely helpful. It gives you an edge if you're able to use it. And I think that's the key point that resonates with me that you brought up is just because you have access to the data, applying it appropriately, being able to use it to have success, that's two completely different things.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, what you put into the model is what you get out of the model, right? Bad data in, bad data out. And that was where I think my biggest struggle was, and maybe yours, but it was finding those key stats, because you got to feed it those key stats for the tournament, and finding that blend of perfect stats was where I always struggled. And you've been kind of doing much better with those, and I think that kind of leads us right into the key stats that we want to talk about for this course. I mean, question, can you kind of, before we get into that, first of all, U.S. Open, how many entries do we have this year, and how many people make the cut?
Yeah, so it's top 60 in ties, so it's your traditional tournament, the way that the PGA Tour has been running for the last year and a half. Previously, it was top 70 in ties. You're going to have 155 guys, 155-ish guys be entered into the tournament. But there are weird guys in there, just like the PGA, where we had random PGA Tour pros that qualified. You're going to have guys that have qualified through numerous tournaments all over the country, from the Korn Ferry Tour, from the Asian Pacific Tour, from all over, that are in this tournament that really have no shot at winning or making the cut. So realistically, you've got a pool of about 100 guys in this tournament that can make that cut. But because it is a standard tournament with the number of people that are involved, it is still difficult to get 6 of 6 through. And I think the one thing that the USGA has done here, specifically in the last 5 or 6 years, is they've really kind of narrowed on what they like to do with the course and the types of skill sets that they want to have success on the courses. Yes, it's going to be ultra difficult, but if you're going back to 2015, the way they've set these courses up, it's really, and it's something that I wrote about in my email that goes out to a number of folks that use my data, it's been their method to basically bake the course out, make it extremely firm, extremely fast, elongate as much of the course as possible, and grow the rough out so that it's so difficult to hit a ball out of the rough that guys are forced to lay up basically on par 4s if they miss the fairway. The other thing they do is they are narrowing the fairways as well too. So a course like Torrey Pines South, which is one of the toughest courses on tour, is going to play god awfully tough this year with the USGA ratcheting up all of those things. Also, with the course being on the coast, you're going to have the aspect of wind and the elements that will play into it. Yes, it's summertime, it's San Diego, all of those things are wonderful, but you're going to deal with wind, especially later in the afternoons. So I think the big thing is what that does is the key stats is it pushes a lot of those guys who can't get down the fairway long enough or who are wayward off the tee out of many people's player pools, because you have to be long and straight to have success. And if you look at the guys going back to Dustin Johnson in 2016 that have won, Dustin, Brooks twice, Bryson DeChambeau, all of those guys are bombers. Even Gary Woodland at Pebble Beach, which is kind of an outlier within the mix over the last 6 years, the big thing is you have to be able to hit the ball long and straight. And I think Bryson is a perfect example of how to crack the USGA code. If you can get the ball down the fairway far enough, it doesn't matter if you're in the rough, because your approach goes from being 175, 200 yards out to being 100 yards, 90 yards out. And that's a massive difference and provides a huge benefit to guys who can get the ball down the fairway a long way.
Yeah, you answered a couple of questions there from me. And first question was, I know they have Torrey Pines North, and I know during the Farmers earlier in the year, they used both courses. In this course, for the U.S. Open, they're going to use the South all 4 days, I take it. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you can do is you can kind of throw out the Farmers, right? Yeah. Because this course is going to play totally different on the South this week than it has since 2008 when the USGA had the U.S. Open there, when Tiger won it and beat Rocco Mediate on the 18th hole. So I think the big thing is there are skill sets that haven't played well at the Farmers traditionally. You're going to have guys that are going to show up and play well, and scoring is going to be extremely difficult. Where the Farmers, you may have a range of winning scores that go from -12 to -15. I think you're going to see similar scores to what we've seen in the past with U.S. Opens, where guys are struggling to break par, and the winning score may be -2 or 6 under in Bryson's case here last year. So I think, again, the course history at Torrey Pines is not as important as course history in the U.S. Open over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, very cool. Well, one cool thing about Torrey Pines I should mention is it's in Tony and my backyard. We're not far from it at all. Unfortunately, I haven't made my way there. I think you've been there, Tony, for at least one of the Farmers tournaments. I have not been able to make my way yet to Torrey Pines, but it is literally, 20 minutes from us, maybe a little bit longer, down in Poway.
Yeah, it's just down the coast from us. I'm a guy that grew up in San Diego, obviously. So Torrey Pines has always been a part of my life, that tournament going back to when it was the Buick Open, 15, 20 years ago. But it's a tournament in the Farmers that I've been able to go to each of the last 4 or 5 years. It is a great tournament. Like I said, it does play very, very difficult. But this is different, man. I mean, this is like Torrey Pines South on steroids. This is all the hype. In my opinion, it's the best major of the year because it is so difficult, and it really is the course versus the field rather than guys being specialists. The one thing about the Masters is it's played at the same course every year. And yes, there are pin placements that are slightly different and tee boxes that are moved up or forward or backwards. But by and large, guys who do well at Augusta always perform well at Augusta. The U.S. Open, you can't really say that. There are dynamics that are at play that you find different at each one of the courses. And whether it's being played on the West Coast or down south or up north, all of those things factor into who the likely candidates are. Yes, there are key stats that I mentioned a minute ago that are extremely important if you want to compete at the U.S. Open based off of the way the USGA does the setup. But I do love it, and I can't wait for it to kick off here on Thursday.
We have a couple of friends joining us in the channel right now. Alberto, who actually worked there for one of the Farmers tournaments, and he's saying that it's beautiful there. And then we did have a question from James Woods, and he's thinking it's top 65. Are we sure about top 60, or do we need to research that a little bit?
It may be top 65. Again, it can vary a little bit. I know that the PGA made the shift from top 70 in ties, so it could be 65. But by and large, the guys that you're going to want to target that are going to get through the cut are your regular PGA pros, the guys that you're going to see every week on tour, with some Euros sprinkled in there. There are some very good Europeans, as well as guys coming down from the Canadian Tour and coming up from the Korn Ferry Tour that I think a lot of people are looking at this week because of their ability to drive the ball a long ways.
Makes sense. Well, while you're chatting a little bit about the next slide, the key stats, I'll take a quick look and I'll find out for sure how many are going to make the cut this year. So why don't we jump over to the key stats, Tony?
Yeah, one of the things that I centered on here from the beginning is strokes gained off the tee. It's extremely, extremely important in the U.S. Open. Like I said, not only do you have to be straight and accurate with the driver, but you've got to hit the ball a long ways. That's why driving distance is the next key stat that's listed there. Along with that, and this goes along for every week, strokes gained approach. You're going to be having approaches from 175 to 200 plus yards out. So you've got to be good with mid and long irons. Obviously, the farther you can drive the ball down the fairway or even into the rough in some cases, you're going to be able to limit, or I should say, minimize that approach distance, which allows you to hit the ball closer to the hole. Par 4 scoring, by and large, is very, very important as well too. There's a lot of long par 4s. There's actually a par 5 that has been converted to a par 4 for this tournament. So it's really going to play, rather than being a par 72, which the Farmers typically is on the South, it's going to play as a par 71 with one of those par 5s converted to a par 4.
Sounds good, Tony. Yes, we did get verification that it is top 60, so we're good there. And one question I have for you. So these key stats, right, they're so important to the model that you're going to see that you present a little bit later on. Where do you get these key stats? How do I come up with these?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we like to do is we look at course history. We look at the types of players and how they perform over time and the guys that have had success on the courses, or in this case, in the U.S. Open tournament, right? And so when we go back and look historically, who's done well, who's peppered the tops of leaderboards, by and large, it's been guys who have had great off-the-tee stats. Now, that's different from course to course. But the way to do that is to look at the historical performance at each one of the tournaments, take a look at the guys that are there, obviously having some exposure and experience with understanding the types of games that guys play, right? If you're asking me about Gary Woodland, I'll tell you Gary's great off the tee. His approaches can be a little bit wonky. He's terrible around the greens, right? A guy like Jordan Spieth, who's a wizard around the greens and putting, has really turned around his off-the-tee game, which has been the biggest thing. But he's also an approach wizard as well, too. So understanding how guys play and where they have success helps you dial in the key stats for each one of the tournaments. And the key stats will shift from time to time. Like I mentioned, the key stats for the Masters are completely different than what they are for the U.S. Open or for the Farmers or any other tournament that's out there. But I think the big thing is take a look at the guys that have been on the leaderboards historically, understand who they are and what their game looks like, and that will help you develop a good strategy for picking those key stats.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. I had a quick question from Heath Castro. And again, maybe we address this later on, but basically I want to make sure we get all these questions answered if we could. He says, do you think Phil has a chance for the Grand Slam?
It's interesting, right? Phil's coming off what is probably the greatest win in recent major history. I mean, again, the guy was 200, 300 to 1 in some books to win the PGA Championship. I unfortunately had Brooks at 50 to 1 pre-tournament, felt unbelievably confident that I was going to win that bet come Sunday, and Phil played lights out. He did everything he was supposed to do to win that tournament, and that's how it turned out. And I think that speaks to the variable nature of golf in general, why it's so hard to play daily fantasy and so hard to hit winners on the PGA Tours, because there is so much variance week to week. Phil is a guy that didn't come in with a lot of form. So to answer the question, does he have a chance? Based off of everything that he's done this year, he absolutely has a chance. He fits the mold from the off-the-tee game if he can keep things under control. Phil hits bombs. That's his mantra. He loves talking about his calves and hitting the ball really, really far. Like, that's his deal. He's got his aviator glasses on. The reality is that, he has an opportunity to do that because he does hit the ball a long ways. So getting the career Grand Slam and winning the U.S. Open, which is a dream of his and something he's been working for his entire career, it is in sight, but it's just not for me. I won't be betting it this week. It's 60 to 1, 71, where he is all over the boards. I just can't see it happening. So much like I was for the PGA Tour where I faded him, I'll be doing the same thing this week.
So, I mean, this answers the question. I take it that if Phil was to win this, that would make it for his career Grand Slams. Does he have the other three, and he just needs this one?
Yeah, so Phil's won the Masters a couple times. He's won the PGA, obviously, which he just did. The U.S. Open is the only one of the majors that he's missing. Wow. So he can pull it off this week. it would be an unbelievable story because the year that he's won multiple times on the Champions Tour. And for him to win 2 majors in the same year at 50 years old would be unheard of in golf. And it would be one of the greatest stories in the history of the PGA.
Being 50 plus years of age myself, I'm pulling for him. And I know there's a ton of fans, fan base that he has. So I'm all in.
Hey, he's a San Diego guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's a big, likable character. He's all over social media. So I think the big thing is whether or not he can keep the driver under control. If he's hitting bombs, but he's hitting it into eucalyptus trees and into that super thick, heavy rough, it's going to be really hard to score this week.
For sure. All right, well, let's move on to the next key stats off the tee and driving distance, and how you have some of these players ranked based on those key stats.
Yeah, so quick housekeeping on the slides that you'll be seeing here. I've got the player names and ranks in each one of the stats, as well as their salary. The salary is what each one of those golfers costs on DraftKings. So if you're building DraftKings lineup and you want to use the key stats to help you center on types of guys to put into your lineups, that's what those stats are there for. So you can see off the tee, which I've mentioned is a key stat. Bryson DeChambeau has been the best driver of the golf ball on tour this year. He's also, by and large, the longest driver of the golf ball. Just because you have length off the tee, that does give you a slight advantage, but it doesn't mean that you're going to perform that much better than everybody else in the field. Cameron Champ is a perfect example. He's number 2 in driving distance in this field. He's been god-awful on the PGA Tour this year. So I think the big thing is, just because a guy is elite with driver distance, that's different than being elite off the tee. A guy like Matthew Fitzpatrick, who doesn't hit the ball a long way, but he rarely finds himself in trouble because he's got that fairway finder. That's the type of guy that you could target that could provide you with that differentiation in your lineup. Targeting guys who hit the ball well off the tee and who have distance is obviously optimal. But finding the differentiation for DK lineups and then looking at guys on how they performed over time is important. You know, you've got the top 15 guys here rated in the field. You know, a couple just that jump out to me as I'm looking down the list. Jason Kokrak is a guy at $7,600 who has a lot of value. He's been playing phenomenally. He's won twice on tour this year. He's probably going to be uber chalky, which means he's going to be owned by a lot of people. But he has a rare combination of distance and accuracy off the tee. Another guy is Scotty Scheffler. He performed well here a few weeks ago. He's a guy that plays well in Texas. Hasn't necessarily had the same kind of success on the West Coast that he has later in the PGA Tour. Another guy that I kind of circle on that is not a familiar name is Taylor Pendrith. He's a Canadian. He is an absolute smasher of the golf ball. The guy hits it a ton off the tee. So he's going to be one of those sleepers that is super popular that a lot of folks are going to be centering on this week because he hits the ball so long and so far. And then our favorite guy, the darling of the Korn Ferry Tour, the rookie who's really been just super successful. He did really well in the U.S. Open here earlier this year, or I should say the previous rendition of the U.S. Open, and that's Will Zalatoris. As of late, he hasn't had the great performances that he had earlier in the year, but again, he is elite off the tee. He does have distance, and I think a lot of people are going to be looking at him to repeat what he did in the 2020 rendition of the U.S. Open.
Yeah, and plus he was second at the Masters, if I'm correct.
Yeah, he's performed well in the majors this year. You know, the big thing for me is that playing a full season on the PGA Tour is a grind, right? It's a long season, and it's difficult for guys to be able to maintain that level of success over time. So whether or not Will can keep it going this week, I don't know, but I do think that a lot of folks are going to be playing him. Another guy that I kind of like is Wyndham Clark. Wyndham's got really good form coming in, and I do think he is going to go under-owned this week.
Sounds good, Tony. Based on the pricing there, I'm probably going to start my lineups in DK, probably in that high 8K range, low 9K, and some of those guys like Cantlay look enticing to me. So I know we can talk on this slide forever, but let's move on to the next one here, where you go over the key stats for the approach and the proximity.
Yeah, again, like we mentioned, approach is just one of those stats by and large every week. You want guys who can put the ball on the green, who can put it in close proximity. And those are two of the big things that we're looking at this week. Because the course is going to play really long, the approaches are going to come from a much longer distance than usual. You've got guys like Colin Morikawa, who has been the king of approach since he's been on tour. The kid is lights out. It doesn't matter where he is, what course he's playing out. He just is so good with his irons. And it doesn't matter whether it's short irons, wedges, long irons. He's just been elite. And I think the big thing for him, the knock for why he may not be as popular as he is in normal tournaments, is he's not a long driver of the golf ball. But in terms of approach, it doesn't get any better than him. Another one is Paul Casey. Paul Casey's just a guy who racks up top fives in majors. He has an amazing track record. He does a phenomenal job of working the ball from left to right, right to left. He has every shot. But again, I think the ability for him to be consistently good over time and be able to step up in these pressure situations, he's proven that time and time again. As we kind of work farther down the board, a guy that I really, really like this week that I think will go under own but has great form is Tyrrell Hatton. He's coming off a second-place finish last week at the Palmetto, and he was this close. I mean, he missed a putt on 18 from off the green or off the fairway, off the green by about an inch that would have put him into that playoff at 11 under with Higo. So I think I really like Tyrrell Hatton's chances. I think that he's fantastic with his long irons, and it really just depends if he can control it off the tee. But I think he's a guy that plays tough course as well. Another one that a lot of folks are talking about is Shane Lowry. Shane Lowry, again, not super long off the tee, but he's extremely accurate. He's having statistically his best approach year in the history of his time, both on the European Tour and the PGA Tour. He's played well in majors the last 2 years. He's a guy that's won a major, and I think at his price at $7,600, I think a lot of folks are ignoring him because of the other golfers that are around him from a pricing perspective.
Yeah, I'm always hit or miss with Shane. Whenever I put him on the lineup, he just doesn't have a good round. But a couple of guys that you mentioned, and one you didn't, who I think is getting no respect at all, is the Masters champ, Hideki, at $8,800. I mean, to me, that's a bargain, and I'm all in on that. Not only is he hit the ball long, he's so accurate. Why do you think he's not getting the respect here as far as pricing goes? I don't mind, but just curious.
Yeah, Hideki's an interesting one because you're right. He does check a lot of the boxes. He's not ridiculously long off the tee, but he's also not short. He is very accurate with irons. I think the big thing with Hideki is he's an absolutely terrible putter. But again, like we talked about, what you're looking for is a guy who can hit it long and straight, who can stick approaches. Hideki's pretty good around the greens, and you just got to hope that he has that magical week where he putts basically at 0 strokes gained. He's a guy that typically loses strokes versus the field every single week. So if Hideki can pull it together on the greens and sink some putts, which his POA splits and how he's done historically on POA greens, which is what we're putting on this week, are not very good. His West Coast history is not that great. So I think that's why a lot of people are choosing to ignore him. The other thing is just options, right? He's got Will Zalatoris. He's got Scheffler. There are other guys in that price range that are around him that I think other people are circling on rather than using Hideki. Me personally, I think he's a great pick. I will probably be adding him to the card this week and will be placing the bet on him because I think he's got great value at 35, 40 to 1, which is what he's sitting at right now.
Right, and Paul Casey, he's always a staple on my lineups, and at that price, $7,900, and the way he's been playing and how you have him ranked here in the model, I can't go wrong with him. I find like every major Paul Casey's in my lineup, not only because how good he is, but just his pricing. He's always $7,900. I mean, come on, can't beat that.
Yeah, when you look at Paul Casey, his DraftKings pricing versus odds, right? The reason why his odds aren't better is because of the top 5, top 10s, and placement odds, right? You're just not going to get a good number to win, even though Paul Casey has proven time and time again he's just not going to win a major championship. The big thing is that Paul Casey is very, very accurate, and he always performs and shows up. He will be uber chalky this week, especially under 8K, and I think a lot of people are going to circle him on their cards because of that history and all of the things that he does well statistically.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting because you're right. Morikawa, I might be saying the name wrong. I'm a big fan of his, and at $9,500, I love the pricing. Like you said, might not hit the ball a ton, but I love the pricing, and I think he rates very well in some of your models later on down the road here in these slides. So let's move on to the next one here. So the statistical model ranking slide there, Tony. Go ahead and talk a little bit about that. So this is basically all those key stats and your top players ranked based on those key stats.
Yep. So this is a little bit different, right? So what it does, it takes all of the key stats that we mentioned: off the tee, driving distance, strokes gained approach, proximity. There's even some other ones sprinkled in there at a lesser percentage. But what it does, it takes all those things and say, okay, tell me over the last 36 to 50 rounds, statistically, based on these stats, who is the best player in the field? And as you can see, Patrick Cantlay, fresh off a win at the Memorial. Again, whether or not you want to count that as a win for Patrick Cantlay, because he still would have lost by a touchdown to John Rahm, who was withdrawn from the tournament with COVID. Cantlay has been getting better and better. He's a guy that has phenomenal West Coast history. He popped this year in the Amex out in Palm Springs. He always plays well in the Genesis, and it could be his time, so especially at the U.S. Open and the Farmers. In what could be a very home crowd for him, you could see Patrick Cantlay show up and play very, very well. Again, not for me, not a guy I'll be playing this week, but I do think those who may use him on DraftKings, you could find that he's not going to be as chalky as some of the other options like Xander Schauffele at 9,300, who is probably going to be one of the highest owned golfers in the field. You could get some ownership break at that level. His odds, I think he's 25 or 22 to 1. To me, that's just not a number that I'm comfortable playing with Patrick Cantlay. You got to show me you can win a major before I'm going to bet you to win a major, especially at those kinds of numbers.
Yeah, totally agree here. Looking at this board, one guy that just shocks me to be on here is Mr. Hoffman, Charlie Hoffman, 7,200. I know he's been playing great golf recently, but look at his numbers based on this model here, jumping off the board. And for that price, when you're trying to get some of those higher end golfers in your lineup, man, that price looks very nice.
Yeah, I mean, you circled on another guy that's just going to be ridiculously chalky in terms of DraftKings plays. Charlie Hoffman has been fantastic. You can see basically in every one of the key stats, he's top 25 or better. He's priced at $7,200. I think you can find him somewhere in the 100 range in the betting markets, 100 to 1. So I think Charlie Hoffman's a guy who's not only going to garner a lot of ownership, but he is going to get a lot of play in the betting markets because he is a San Diego guy. He is a guy that plays historically well at the Farmers. And because of all of those reasons, I think you're going to find that a lot of people are going to be circling Charlie Hoffman.
So Cantlay, you think he's plus 10% or below 10% ownership?
Yeah, I think Cantlay is going to come in right about 10 or 12% ownership, which I think is going to be a drastic break compared to guys like Paul Casey or even a guy like Victor Hovland. Victor Hovland's another one that I think is going to be probably, if he's not the most highly owned golfer right there with Xander Schauffele, he could be really close. But I think Cantlay's probably going to come in at about half that ownership, where Xander comes in north of 20%. You can probably get Patrick Cantlay at half that number.
Okay. All right, Tony, moving on to your U.S. Open history ranking.
Yep. So, again, when we start talking about how guys perform historically at the U.S. Open, that is more important to me this week than how guys have played at the Farmers historically. And, when you talk about that, again, some of this, it has to do with how guys have done, like their finishing places, but also it takes into consideration their average strokes gained at each one of the U.S. Opens over the last 5 years. As you can see, Matthew Wolff came in second last year in his first and only U.S. Open. He gained, I think, something like 16 strokes on the field. So he's ranked as number one. Obviously, really small sample set. A guy like Brooks Koepka, who's won it twice, has come in second and has performed unbelievably well basically at every major since he's been on the PGA Tour, ranked number 2. Xander Schauffele right there at number 3, local guy from San Diego, getting a lot of hype. And then the next guy in line is Louis Oosthuizen. Surprises a lot of people. Yeah, here's the thing with Louis. If Louis doesn't withdraw, he's probably going to finish in the top 10. He's a guy that always pops in majors, just like Paul Casey. He's not going to win. He's probably going to finish somewhere in the top 5, top 10. So for me, a guy like him is not a good outright bet. But if you're looking to do some of those props, bet a top 5, bet a top 10, Louis is a great way to fill out that card. And then again, as we kind of go down the list a little bit farther, Victor Hovland in his 2 U.S. Open debuts, he's finished inside the top 15. He's a guy that I will be betting this week, and I think has a great opportunity to win because he not only combines that rare combination of both approach, and off the tee, but he's also drives the ball a really long way. So again, I think Victor Hovland is a guy that you could see being the highest owned golfer on DraftKings. He's getting a ton of play in betting markets, and me myself, I will also be adding him to my card.
Yeah, just on these, I mean, there's 15 players here roughly. I mean, and looking at the pricing, you can put a studded lineup together on DraftKings with these players right here listed, and I think you'd be in good shape. So there's a few players here I'm probably going to be starting my lineup with. I love Xander. Against Xander, I don't feel like I'm ever going to get any win equity with him, but I know I mean, look at those numbers. He's 5, 3, 6, 5. He's going to be top 10. I feel good about that. Louis, like you said, love it. Louis been on a roll, and anytime there's a major, I don't know, Louis just keeps it together, like you said, unless he pulls out of the tournament. But if he's in there, he's just always around the leaderboard as well, top of the leaderboard. And then my other guy here would probably be Hovland. I've been playing Hovland a lot. He doesn't disappoint. Now, what's his driving distance like?
Yeah, I think in terms of driving distance, he's in the top half of the field. I think he's like 40th or 43rd. But then also in accuracy, he's like in the top 40. So you're getting a guy who is in what I would call the top half of the field in both categories. He is one of the few guys that does check both boxes. A rare combination of distance and accuracy. And again, just ball striking in general, he is an absolute wizard. Where he is terrible, but he is getting better, is around the greens. The big thing for him is he's got to hit approaches. He's got to take advantage of his driver, because if he's missing fairways and he's missing greens, it could be over real quick. I think a lot of people remember here probably 4 or 5 tournaments ago where he got like a 9 on a hole, where basically he tripped over 2 or 3 times because he just could not hit the green. And that's the danger with a guy like Victor Hovland. For me, for my money, how he's played, where he rates out statistically, his history, I don't think you can get a better guy than him. The other guy that I really like this week, and it's a guy that I'm considering, even though typically I wouldn't, is Justin Thomas. Justin Thomas, he won the Players' Championship this year. He's a guy who pops, right? And it really depends on whether or not he can get everything going. His West Coast history is not the best. Farmers is not the best. But again, it is Justin Thomas. And when you're betting a guy, not necessarily playing him in DraftKings, when you're betting a guy, you're betting that ceiling. You're looking for a peak performance. And he's the type of guy at 22 to 25 to 1, where normally you would get Justin Thomas at 11, 12 to 1. He's got me thinking about pulling the trigger. The other thing is at $9,700, JT is typically a guy that's 10 grand and above all the time, and typically over $11,000. So you're getting a discount in both the DraftKings market and the betting market. To me, you just got to hope he has a ceiling week and he shows up and he wins the damn thing. And at that price, you could see a lot of people cash some big tickets.
What do you think about the pricing on Brooks, and what do you think his chances are? I mean, obviously look at his history in U.S. Opens, but I know he's been banged up this year. I think he's had a knee issue. And at that price, do you think he goes a little less ownership there, or do you think that's a price people are going to jump all over?
I think Brooks is going to be heavily owned. I mean, throwing Matthew Wolff out because it is a small data set. The guy has been elite at the U.S. Open. I think he's shucked any rumors about his knee being banged up. And to me, he's a great play. What it came down to for me is whether I was going to take Bryson or I was going to take Brooks. I ended up going with Bryson because I got a better number on him. I think Brooks you can find out there anywhere from 15 to 18. Bryson you can find at 18 to 19 in the betting markets. In terms of DraftKings, he does give you a little bit of room from the top, right? If you're not taking John Rahm, I think Brooks may be the second or third price guy, but you can still build lineups with Brooks and another guy in the mid to high 9s. Which gives you leverage and be able to stack your teams. Again, with the major pricing that we always get in DraftKings, there's a lot of opportunity to put together some very stout lineups. But in terms of whether or not you think Brooks is going to be heavily owned, I think Brooks is going to be 20-some% this week, and I think Bryson's also going to be 20-some%. So I think both guys are going to garner a lot of ownership.
All right, interesting. I was hoping maybe with the injury this year and that price, maybe he would garner less ownership, but you're probably right. So let's move on, Tony, to
Well, I mean, the narrative too with him and Bryson, you've got, this whole competition that they've got going on social media. They can't stand each other. I think it came out today that the USGA approached Bryson and said, "Hey, how would you feel if we put you and Brooks in the same group?" And he declined. So, there's a number of dynamics being built into this. And I think you've got this real separation, kind of like Beatles people and Elvis people. You've got Brooks people and you've got Bryson people. Brooks is more likable. He's a guy that's really used social media well. And by and large, I think most of the fans have sided with Brooks in this pseudo argument that's been I guess, developed between him and Bryson. But for me this week, Bryson, I think, is where my money is going to go and how I'll construct my lineups. Like I mentioned before, he is the best guy in the off the tee stats. He does have the distance. He's the farthest driver of a golf ball on tour. And then the thing to me is he's also an excellent putter. And so having that POA experience, being one of the better guys on the greens in that elite group of golfers, to me, that's the deciding factor and why I chose to go with him over Brooks.
Gotcha. All right, moving on to the next slide here I just put up, which is the recent form ranking. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the recent form takes into account how guys have performed over the last 5 or 6 weeks. Just looking as they build into this, for most people, that's the indicator that folks like to look at, right? How has this guy been performing over the last few weeks as he enters whatever the golf tournament is? And this just happens to be the major in the U.S. Open. And so from a recent form perspective, you can see here, Colin Morikawa and Abraham Ancer are basically identical. They're trending in different directions. Morikawa finished second at the Memorial at Cantlay. Again, both guys should have lost to Jon Rahm, and it shouldn't have been close. But Morikawa loses in a playoff. He misses a 6-footer in the first playoff hole that would have pushed that to another one. Again, unfortunately, I had money on Morikawa, not on Cantlay, and things didn't go my way. But that's just the way that it goes. And I think recent form is a great indicator for how guys are playing, for measuring their confidence. And it correlates well with the stats. When you look statistically how a guy's performed over 12, 24, 36 rounds, that's going to relate directly to their recent form and how they've finished. And you can see here, a guy that I talked about earlier, Kokrak's the kind of guy that can show up. Shane Lowry, who we mentioned, has two top tens here over the last 4 weeks. And so we've got a lot of guys coming into the U.S. Open in great form. Another guy that's going to be uber chalky because he is playing very well at the moment is Kevin Streelman. Not a bomber off the tee, but a guy who rarely misses a fairway. The guy crushes long irons. And when he gets hot putting, and he is a good POA putter, again, which is the surface that we'll be putting on this week, I think a lot of folks are going to circle him and say, I'm going to take Kevin Streelman, especially at $7,100 because he gives you so much leverage in your lineups.
Yeah, I love the price in there. And I know you're not a big fan, but Brandon Grace has always been one of my favorites. So, and that pricing right there at $7,200 helps you put those lineups together where you have those higher price guys in those lineups. Patrick Reed, you kind of you didn't talk about him, but I feel like Patrick's built for these tough courses. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so both guys that you mentioned, Brandon Grace and Patrick Reed. Brandon Grace first. I think he's a phenomenal play on DraftKings. Again, I think he's a very good top 20 play, a good top 10 play. His form is great. He's coming in good shape. His statistics line up with what he does well. To your point, much like Patrick Reed, he's a guy in really long, difficult golf courses. He just shows up and plays well. And again, he's found some of that form that kind of has eluded him over the last couple of years. Patrick Reed, he won the Farmers this year. He's familiar with this course. He's a great POA putter. He shows up, plays well at tough courses every single year. So I can't knock Patrick Reed. For me, at $9,000, he could be a good pivot off of somebody like Xander. So I think if you're building multiple lineups, if you're the kind of guy that's going to submit 5, 10, 20 lineups, I think it would be a great idea to work Patrick Reed into some of those lineups, pivot off a guy like Xander Schauffele, who's going to be uber chalky and owned by basically everybody. Give yourself some leverage on the field. In the betting markets, I've seen his number tumble from where it opened at like 40 down to 25, I think is where it's currently at. And so the big thing is you just got to figure out whether or not you think he can win this tournament. Because of his number, you're not going to get good value at the top 5 or the top 10. But I think Patrick Reed, if you have a feeling about him, if you think this is Patrick Reed's tournament, I have no problem betting him, man. I think he's great. He's a guy that I hit on earlier this year at the Farmers. So Patrick Reed is somebody that I think can show up, does check a lot of boxes, and could show up. He could also grenade, because Patrick Reed is one of those guys that has a high amount of variation. You can see it right there. He had a 17th, a missed cut, and then a 5th place. So you got to figure out which Patrick Reed is going to show up.
Two more players I want to talk about, because Alberto here has mentioned them. Abraham Answer, okay, at 7,900, he's been playing phenomenal golf, but does he have the distance to compete here? And then, of course, your favorite, who you skipped over here, but I'm not going to let you get away that easily, Justin Rose. You love the guy, you play him all the time. Talk about those two players.
Yeah, so Abraham Answer, he's going to be very, very popular at $7,900. He does check a lot of the statistical boxes. The only exception would be distance off the tee. I don't think he's had great success on the West Coast, but he is a guy who is phenomenal. One of the best players on the PGA Tour with long irons. You put a 3-iron, a 5-iron in this guy's hand, and he's laser accurate. He is also a very good streaky putter. He does putt well on POA. So Answer's a guy I think that could surprise some people. For me in the betting markets, I just can't see him winning this tournament, especially being his first PGA Tour win. To me, you've got to check the box and get a win before I see you winning a major. As much as I like Answer, I don't see him winning the golf tournament. Is he a good DraftKings play? I think there's some value there. It really comes down to ownership. To me, a guy like Louis Oosthuizen, who's $200 more, you're going to get a drastic cut in ownership versus what Answer is. And so it really comes down to lineup construction. Another guy that you mentioned, who I have a Justin Rose problem. Let's just get that out there. I could not stop playing the guy because I think he's going to pop. In the weeks that I play him, he misses the cut. In the weeks that I fade him because I'm so pissed off that he graded my lineup, the guy shows up and finishes top 5. He's a guy that's won a U.S. Open. To me, much like Phil in the PGA Championship, it's going to take a Herculean effort for Justin Rose to win this golf tournament. He's not the guy that he was 5 years ago. With all that being said, it doesn't mean that he can't have that type of performance. He's always done well at the Farmers. He usually does well at majors. So again, just looking at the body of work and the pedigree that Justin Rose has, it's hard to ignore him. I am not going near him this week, which means he will probably finish top 5, and you should probably bet him as well.
Absolutely. He's going to be in my lineup at 8K, and the fact that you're avoiding them this week, he's in. I'm all in on him. All right, so let's move on, Tony, here. We got, let's talk about, recent form ranking. So you had 2 slides on the recent form ranking. This one, I guess, based on recent form, U.S. Open history rank, stat rank. Talk a little bit about that slide.
Yeah, so the second slide, I think it's a minor typo. It should be overall rank up top rather than recent form rank. But what this does is we take the model calculations for the stats, how guys break down statistically. We add in their U.S. Open history and then their recent form, how they finished in tournaments coming in. And what you get is that overall rank in the left-hand column. And so the top 15 guys, based on the overall ranking, stats, history, form, you can see how the golfers rate out. And if you look down that list, and we talked about the guys that are going to be chalky, Victor Hovland, number 1, Charlie Hoffman, number 2, Xander Schauffele, number 3. Those 3 guys will probably be the most heavily owned golfers in the field. Another guy I love, Jason Kokrak, he's going to be up there in ownership. He comes in at number 5. Bryson DeChambeau, a guy I have bet, a guy I will be playing this week in DraftKings, comes in at number 6. Patrick Cantlay, the wizard of the statistical model. Again, his form is fantastic, coming off of a win. You can see how all the players break down. And again, when we start looking at the overall ranking, that's just what the model spits out. Right? So it's taking into account all of these different factors and saying, based off the criteria, here are the best golfers in the field as they rate compared to each other. That doesn't necessarily mean that's who I'm picking or who I'm playing, or that you should be doing the same thing. Like we mentioned, a guy like Xander Schauffele, if you're going to be using him in DraftKings, don't put him in all your lineups. Pivot to a guy who's at a similar price range, like a Justin Thomas or like a Patrick Cantlay, who's going to come in at basically half the ownership. That gives you an advantage versus the field. again, Xander, I can't bet him this week. He's coming in at 16 to 18 to 1. That's the same numbers that you're going to be paying for Dustin Johnson, a multiple major winner, a guy who is the number one player in the world. You got guys like Justin Thomas and Rory who have won multiple majors that are coming in at 20 and 25. I think it's a joke that Xander Schauffele is at 16 and 18. It doesn't mean that he can't win this tournament, but again, what he's proven over time in these tight spots, especially in the majors, is that he can play well, but he just can't close. Similarly, Tony Finau, who's not on this list, but a guy I have bet, again, just like Justin Rose, I have a Tony Finau problem. Tony Finau is a guy that checks a lot of boxes, and I think a lot of people will use it in DraftKings. I also bet him this week, but again, his number is double what Xander's is. And for me, you're just getting a lot more value for those betting odds than paying 16 or 18 to 1 for a guy like Xander Schauffele.
Yeah, like I said earlier, for me in DraftKings, I think I got to take him. I'm guaranteed, I feel like I'm guaranteed a top 10. Someday he'll get that win, but you got to realize if you're going to put him in your lineup, you're probably not going to get that win equity, meaning the odds of him winning this thing are slim. But I mean, the odds of him finishing top 10, top 5, for that price, I might be okay with that.
Yeah, again, it comes back to return. If you're betting a guy who's at the top of the DraftKings board, or I should say at the top of the board, Jon Rahm, who's coming in at 10, 11 to 1, he needs to win the golf tournament to return value comparatively with the other guys in the field, right? If you're talking about any other sport, football, baseball, whatever, 10 to 1 is a great number. In golf, it's terrible. Basically, what it tells you is you have to put double the amount of money on a guy like Jon Rahm, who's never won a major, for somebody that you could get like Rory. I can get Rory and JT for better odds than I can get Jon Rahm. So basically, I'd have to double the bet that I would put on either one of those guys to make it make sense from a payoff perspective. So again, when it comes down to betting, what we try to do is we try to find value down the board. We look at where guys are priced comparatively to the other guys in the field. And for me, Xander Schauffele at 16 to 1, I just don't see the value. You can get Brooks at 16. You can get Bryson at 18. You can get DJ at 16 or 18. Those numbers are better to me. They're guys who have proven they can win major tournaments, and especially one like this that's going to be uber pressure packed for Xander, who is a local guy. He's going to have family on the ground. He is a guy that's from San Diego, graduated from San Diego State. And so all of those intangibles, I think, to me, put him at a disadvantage versus some of the other guys in the field.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. You talked about that many times with Ricky, right? Ricky seems to be he's got commercials going on, and he's always entertaining folks, and especially at certain tournaments and how it impacts them. And it typically does. If you have all that going on, it seems to affect you that week playing golf. So totally agree with you. You might have just talked me off him.
Yeah, I mean, again, it doesn't mean Xander can't go out and win it. It just, again, it's not for me. You got to, at the top of the board, you got to kind of pick your stance, right? Go with your guys, choose your horse, figure out how you're going to construct your lineups. And just because he's going to come in so heavily owned and his number is, again, with guys to me that are of a better pedigree and proven that they can win major championships, he's just not a guy that I'm looking at this week. If he wins, I'll tip the cap. He's a San Diego guy. I'll be pissed off because I lost money. But again, I'll be happy for Xander Schauffele. And then he will justify being 16-18 going forward from here on out.
Totally agree. So let's move on. Tony, 2021 U.S. Open betting odds. I think you covered a lot of that already. Is there anything else you want to kind of go through on this particular slide?
Yeah, I would say, when you start talking about guys at the top of the board, Jon Rahm, Brooks Koepka, Dustin Johnson, you got to pick your stance, right? And you start going down a little bit farther. Historically, where we've seen major champions come from has been in that 20 to 50 range, and there's a lot of value there, right? You're talking about guys like Patrick Reed and Victor Hovland and Tony Finau and Patrick Cantlay. These are all guys that are on the cusp of being elite level players, right? Patrick Reed, a guy who's won a major championship. He won earlier this year at the Farmers. But to me, basically, I can get 5 guys in that range at the same amount of money that I would need to spend to get a return as I would one Jon Rahm. And while I love Jon Rahm, and I think Jon Rahm's got the game, he's also got the history and the pedigree on the West Coast. He's got great post splits. He's a great driver of the golf ball. Go out and win it, Jon Rahm. Coming off of COVID and all the BS that he's had to deal with here the last week and a half, getting ejected from the Memorial Tournament after the 3rd round. To me, there's just a lot of noise around that, and it's difficult for me to say that guy is the odds-on favorite at 10-1, and I'm going to go ahead and place that bet. I'd rather take a guy farther down the board, take 2 or 3 guys, and get better value for my money for guys that I think had the same opportunity to win this tournament this week.
Makes total sense, Tony. So let's talk about those bets. Let's take a look at who you're betting on this week.
So when you're talking about who I've got, which is why the graphic is up there and shows basically that you're burning cash. For me, the bets that I have, a lot of these are futures. I bet Bryson after he won last year's tournament in 18-1. His number is basically identical. Hovland, a guy, it was another futures bet that I picked up prior to, I believe it was the PGA Championship. He's still at 28. Finau's now drifted. Finau's number is down in the low 20s like it does every single major because people cannot stop betting Tony Finau. I myself am one of those people. But again, he's a guy that checks a lot of boxes. Down a little farther down the board, early in the year when Gary Woodland was playing terrible, I was able to get a great number at him at 125. I also have Bubba on the card at 175. Bubba is historically one of the best polo putters on tour. He's a guy that's won the Farmers Tournament before. Recently, his form has not been great. Statistically, though, he checks a lot of boxes. He hits the ball a long way. It just whether or not Bubba can put it together for 4 days, similar to Justin Rose. Other guys that I'm looking at strictly because of their numbers, Rory has drifted back to 22-1 from where he was at 20. Jordan Spieth, I mean, good God, the guy was the hottest golfer on tour here basically a month ago. His game is as good or better than it was when he was clicking and winning major championships. And if you think back to 2015 when he won the U.S. Open, that was really Jordan Spieth's coming out party. They played a course up in Washington. It was baked out. It was long. It had ridiculous rough. Jordan Spieth is not a massive driver of the golf ball, and he was able to put it together doing what Jordan Spieth does. He putts like a wizard. He's unbelievable around the greens. He's able to manufacture shots where anybody would have no chance other than maybe Phil Mickelson. And so to me, at that number, considering where he is with his form, that's an interesting number. Other guys we've already talked about, but another guy that I think is way down on the betting boards, but again, that number is drifting quickly, is Max Homa. Homa's a guy that's won the Genesis, which is a concourse for the Farmers. He's a guy that's won Wells Fargo. Has a similar style to Rory. So again, I really think Max Homa farther down the board. And there's some other guys. Matt Wallace is a guy who's playing phenomenal. Again, not a smasher of the golf ball by any means, but a guy who hits a decent drive and is phenomenal with long irons. If you're not going to be an elite driver of the golf ball, you've got to be great with long irons and you've got to be a wizard around the greens. And Matt Wallace checks both of those boxes. So I think there's some good numbers out there. You can see what I've done. I'll probably update my card with 1 or 2 more of these bets before we get into the tournament on Thursday. And I'll probably add some live odds. One of my biggest hits this year was Justin Thomas at the Players. I hit him pre-tournament at 25, and then after he had a terrible first round, I re-upped at 80-1 because I could see that his statistics, what he was doing ball striking wise, were good, and he returned an immense value for me. So I'll be watching some of these numbers even after we start the tournament and where the live odds are to see if I might be able to pick up a few more guys on my card.
Excellent, Tony. Great information. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. So let's get down right to it. Who's going to win this? I think I know who you're going to say, but, give me your top 2 players to win this.
So the first one, the guy that I am pulling for because I would love to see it, is Viktor Hovland. He's played phenomenal this year. I love the number of 28-1. It would be a great hit for me. Checks every single box you could want from a guy. He's just got to go out there and prove that he can do it. The 2 tournaments that he has won is the Puerto Rico and the Mayakoba. They're not great tournaments, but I think he has been playing great, and it's just a matter of time until he wins that major, just like Morikawa did. The other one is Bryson for me. I wouldn't have bet him at 18-1 if I didn't think Bryson was a guy that could repeat as U.S. Open champion. Again, he's a guy that's played well at the Farmers. He is the best driver of the golf ball on tour, and it really depends if he can hold it together with the approach shots. He's good around the greens. He is one of the best putters of the elite level golfers. And so to me, Bryson DeChambeau, Viktor Hovland would probably be 1-2 for me. The other guy that I think has an outside shot that I think folks should be looking at is Jason Kokrak. He's played great. He's a guy that's won 2 tournaments already this year. Again, driving the ball, his performance last year in the U.S. Open, what he's done in majors here recently, he's trending in the right direction. And if you can get him at that 75 to 100 number, or even down into the 60s, that could be a good win. And then finally, Max Homa, I think, is another one that I could realistically go out there and win this thing. He's a great young golfer. He is very good off the tee, and he is trending so well, being on the West Coast, having the advantage of being on familiar surfaces, playing out of Kikuya, putting on POA. Those are advantages that other guys that spend the majority of their time on the East Coast just don't have. So for me, the pseudo picks would be Hovland, DeChambeau, Kokrak, and Homa. But I wouldn't be surprised if Brooks or Rory or one of those other guys pulls it off. Another guy that hasn't been getting a lot of pub, but again, he is the #1 golfer in the world, is Dustin Johnson. If Dustin Johnson plays like Dustin Johnson, he'll run away with this thing. So you just got to pick and choose your battles. I've given you my 4. Mike, who do you like this week?
Well, I can't. It's hard to go against DeChambeau. I know you've been a fan of him all year. Every time, every week, it's like DeChambeau's going to win this. DeChambeau's going to win this. Hard to go against him, so he'll be one of my picks. I'm going to go with Xander. He's due. It's got to happen sometime, Tony. It's got to happen sometime. I know we just talked about all the the things that he's got to deal with this week with being a local, being from that area. But I'm going to go with him, and then of course I'm going to go with the long shot, Mr. Phil. Got to go with Phil. So that's just from my heart. That's the only reason I'm going to go with that. I'm not betting like you. And honestly, Phil won't be in any of my lineups, so what does that really say? But I will be pulling for him, and I'm going to call the long shot because if he wins, Tony, we're going to come back to this, and we're going to say I made that call, along with Keith Castro out there. He and I believe Phil can do this.
Look, like I mentioned, if Phil somehow is able to put together the magic fairy dust for another week in a major championship, right? He gets the calf juice rolling. He's hitting bombs. He's got the aviators in full force. Again, could he win it? Yes. He's one of the greatest players that ever play on the PGA Tour. For me, I just can't see it. Like you, if he wins, hey, that's great. What an amazing story. But I just can't see it happening. I'd rather go, if you're going to go long shot old timer guys, guy like Charlie Hoffman, man. I'd love to see Charlie Hoffman win it. He's a guy from Poway, a local dude. He's invested in the community. He's had a really long, very good journeyman career in the PGA Tour. To see him win a tournament like this, to me, would be an unbelievable story. So if I'm picking old guys, I'm going to go with Charlie Hoffman versus.
I can't disagree with you. I remember for when we first got into DraftKings, we would never take Charlie. We would overlook him week after week, and he'd prove us wrong. And now I'm at a point where I'm actually comfortable with playing Charlie in my lineups because he has been a lot more consistent than he used to be, and he's playing some great golf. So I'm with you there. And again, if he wins, another good story. He's a good guy, right? I love when these good people win these tournaments. So I'm with you there. So Tony, I think that just about does it for us. This is fantastic. I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much. I know we're going to do more of this. But I think the channel enjoyed it as well. Any closing things you want to say, or good to go?
No, enjoy the week. Like I said, it is one of the best majors to watch on TV, to bet, to do daily fantasy. Thanks to you, Mike, for putting it together. I would remind everybody out there to like, sub, comment, send us your information. If you wanted to be added to my weekly letter that I put out with my entire statistical model, you can shoot me an email. We will put that in the comments of the video. So if anybody wants to get a copy of that for future references for any of the tournaments down the road, I do this weekly. The plan is to put together a weekly podcast that is built off of these live streams that we put together, right? We're out there flapping in the breeze doing this live. But again, that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it entertaining. And I think as we continue to grow this, we'll put together some better segments. We'll try to trim down the time. We're on damn near an hour, so I appreciate everybody that's stuck in this far. But thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you down the road.
Information. Thanks a lot, Tony, and thank you everybody else for joining us. Until next time, everybody have a great week.